It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. The Marc Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Marc is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Marc Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for our weekly discussion of the important legal and political issues of the day. You're welcome to call in at 717-540-0580. 717-540-0580. You can send me a tweet at Marc Scaringi, and I'll read your tweet on the air if it says something very nice about me. For all my columns, prior podcasts of the show, and a look at some great merchandise we have, check out the MarcScaringiShow.com. Today we're broadcasting on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live again, and Sean Guay of Harrisburg 100 is here with us today. Welcome, Sean.
Hi, Marc. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Well, the country was rocked a few days ago by the guilty plea of President Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen. Mr. Cohen pled guilty to 8 counts charged against him by the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. The first 6 counts involved tax fraud and making false statements to his bank. Counts 7 and 8 that pertain to alleged campaign violations will be the topic of today's show. It's the campaign finance violations that implicate President Trump. So let's take a closer look at those particular charges. And then I want to hear from my listeners and hear what they think and what they have to say about the Cohen guilty plea and whether or not they believe it implicates the president in the commission of a campaign finance violation. Well, count 7 of the indictment charges Mr. Cohen with willfully causing an unlawful corporate contribution. Count 8 charges Mr. Cohen with making an excessive campaign contribution. Now, in short, here are the facts. Mr. Cohen set up 2 limited liability companies, which he used to do the following. 1, he purchased the rights of a non-disclosure agreement Karen McDougal had signed with the National Enquirer for $125,000. This is referred to as a catch and kill, where a person believes he or she has a story to sell, and instead of a magazine or a media company publishing the story, they'll purchase the story and then essentially sell it to the individual who thinks he may be harmed by the story. In any event, before Mr. Cohen could remit the $125,000 payment, the media company informed him the deal was off. Now, the second part of this is that Mr. Cohen entered into an agreement with the infamous Stormy Daniels, in which he signed a confidential settlement agreement for $130,000. Now, he did make that payment, and now that's the subject of a separate civil suit in which Stormy Daniels is trying to nullify the confidential non-disclosure agreement to allow her to speak publicly about the alleged affair, even though she pretty much has been speaking publicly about the alleged affair. Now, Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels were selling their rights to tell their story about alleged affairs they had with Donald J. Trump when he was a citizen and not running for elective office. These agreements were negotiated and signed during the time Donald Trump was running for president. Now, Mr. Cohen, his then lawyer, was later reimbursed by the Trump Organization for those payments. And the critical part of the government's indictment against Mr. Cohen is their allegation that he caused and made the payments, Mr. Cohen that is, in order to influence the 2016 presidential election. That's the key term of art, the influence of a presidential election. Now, during the guilty plea colloquy, the prosecutors made Mr. Cohen say under oath to the judge presiding that the payments to Stormy and McDougal were made in coordination with and at the direction of a candidate for federal office, aka Donald J. Trump. Cohen stated further during his guilty plea, I participated in this conduct for the principal purpose of influencing the election for president in 2016. Now, in my view, that's a false statement. The dictionary defines purpose as the reason why something is done. The purpose of paying these two fine ladies any money and having them sign non-disclosure agreements was to ensure they would not talk about their alleged affair with Mr. Trump. That's exactly what the settlement agreements say and do. So that's their purpose. A synonym of purpose is motive, and people understand the term motive, I guess, a little bit more. And motive is a term used in discussing crimes, so we'll use it here. Cohen and or Trump may have had what you hear in courtroom television shows referred to as an ulterior motive. An ulterior motive is defined as existing beyond what is obvious or admitted. So yes, Trump may have had an ulterior motive behind the obvious motive or purpose, which is to silence Stormy and Ms. McDougal. It's beyond doubt that the obvious motive behind Trump's payment of the hush money was to get the hush or the silence, and that was an obvious and express objective or purpose of the payment of the money. An ulterior motive, or as some courts have characterized it as an incidental purpose, could have been to protect Trump's campaign from scandal. It could also have been to protect his wife, Melania, and his son from shame and embarrassment. And of course, it could have been to protect Trump himself from shame and embarrassment. Those are all purposes of the non-disclosure agreements that were negotiated and paid for by the Trump organization. So there were likely several purposes or reasons why Trump paid the money that was ancillary or incidental to the obvious purpose of purchasing the silence of these ladies. Now let's take a closer look at the statute Mr. Cohen was charged with violating. It does not define the phrase, the purpose of influencing an election. And the law is nebulous and murky in this area. So because the statute doesn't define the phrase, purpose of influencing an election, we have to look to the courts to see how they defined it. And the leading case, ironically, comes from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which is binding authority on the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Manhattan, which is the court presiding over Mr. Cohen. So this court decision in the Second Circuit is critically important to the prosecution of Mr. Cohen. And the Second Circuit Court is reviewing a newspaper advertisement that was purchased, paid for, by a committee of concerned citizens back in 1972 who wanted to promote and publicize the need to impeach then-President Nixon. And we're going to talk more about this important case that's binding precedent over the Michael Cohen case in the Southern District. When we return from this brief commercial break, you're listening to the Marc Scaringi Show. And now we're on commercial break on WHP 580 and iHeartRadio, but we're still here on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live. I wonder if our fans on Harrisburg 100 Facebook can hear us. And if you'd like to comment or pose a question on Facebook Live, go right ahead and do so. And maybe we'll put you on the air and you'll be a media star. We'll see how that goes. Sean, do you have any thoughts about any of the members of your organization, what they're thinking about this Cohen plea deal?
I think a lot of this, people are really looking at this just as another way to discredit Trump. And
Oh no, that's right.
you're right, yeah. So I mean, it's just another every day. It's the onslaught against Trump. And as far as Cohen goes, you know, they're gonna pick apart every aspect of this thing till they can find something to try and pin on Trump, to make it Trump's fault, to make him look bad. So I think this is just another attempt by the media and the Democrats.
Well, in this case, also an attempt by the United States District Attorney of the Southern District of Manhattan for bringing the charges. And there's a lot of commentary about the importance of that particular language being included in the plea colloquy, and because that will establish, according to the prosecutor, the purpose of Mr. Cohen's actions, and thus implicating the president in this alleged campaign finance violation. And I think, and we'll talk about this later in the show, that's done to give Democrats in the House legs to stand on for the purposes of bringing impeachment proceedings against the president.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, the Constitution talks about impeachment and defines the grounds by which a president can be impeached to include high crimes and misdemeanors.
Right.
And we're going to get into what the framers of the Constitution meant by that phrase. It maybe perhaps later in the show, but no, I think it's. I think this is an effort, obviously, to help facilitate the effort to impeach the president. So, in my view, and I'm interested to hear what the Harrisburg 100 commenters think, that this is all about impeachment. And if the Republicans lose the House this fall, this president, in my opinion, is in jeopardy of facing impeachment proceedings in the House. Looks like we're getting a little closer to getting back on air with WHP 580 and iHeartRadio. So we'll get ready for that.
Great. Yeah, this is good opportunity for the two organizations to come together as far as the Marc Scaringi Show and Harrisburg 100. So I thank you again, Mark.
Oh, yes. Well, you're quite welcome.
Now, more of Marc Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show. Again, this is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. Call in 717-540-0580. We're broadcasting live on WHP 580 AM, iHeartRadio, and, of course, Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live. And we'll take your calls, 717-540-0580. And we'll take your comments via Harrisburg 100's Facebook live presentation. We're talking about the guilty plea of President Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, and its implication on the efforts by Democrats to bring impeachment proceedings against this president. And I'll ask my listeners, what do they think? Do you think that Michael Cohen and Donald Trump violated a campaign finance law? Do you think that this prosecution and guilty plea of Michael Cohen is being orchestrated for the purpose of helping out the Democrats and facilitating their efforts to bring impeachment proceedings against the president? Call in. We want to hear your thoughts and your take on this critically important political and legal issue of the day, and that's what the Marc Scaringi Show is all about, right? So call in 717-540-0580. And we're kind of breaking down the statute that Mr. Cohen has been charged with. And I fear that I'm probably going to get pretty much in the weeds here, as I sometimes do when we talk about the law in court cases. So I'm happy to be interrupted by any listener who wants to call in and give me his understanding or his thought, his take on this important legal and political matter. But in any event, way back in 1972, President Richard Nixon was in serious trouble, and there was a committee of people who got together and they put an ad in the New York Times. And in that ad, They called for the impeachment of President Nixon. And they listed those congressmen and women who had voted for impeachment, and they put them on an honor roll, as they refer to it. And they stated in the ad that this committee would devote its resources in funds and publicity in aid of any new candidate for election to Congress or re-election of any incumbent member who supports impeachment of President Nixon. So that was the ad, and I think the committee paid about $17,000 for that newspaper ad. Was that newspaper ad a campaign contribution? Was it made to influence an election? And the Second Circuit Court of Appeals held that it was not, that the ad was not done for the primary purpose of influencing an election. So the court held the $17,000 spent on the ad was not a campaign contribution to the members of Congress listed in the ad. It was not a campaign contribution at all, and that's because the court was looking at the principal aim or thrust of the ad, and concluded it was to impeach the president and not to influence elections. The court stated the central theme of the advertisement at issue here relates to impeachment and not specific election campaigns or candidates. So as such, the purpose of the advertisement, as we construe it, was at most only incidentally to support candidates and engage in political activity. And that term incidental is critical, and it's critical to the Cohen case and any case that could be brought against the president. We'll talk a little bit more about this important circuit court case that has binding authority over the prosecution of Michael Cohen. In the meantime, we'll open up the phone lines and we'll take some calls and we'll hear what our listeners think. Sally from Harrisburg, you're on the Marc Scaringi Show. Did Michael Cohen violate the law?
No, I believe that there is no impeachment needed. I just want to make that point, Mark, that the impeachment process itself, even if they wanted to go through with it and it passed through the House, the Senate would override. There would be no impeachment. I wish these liberals and Democrats would get off this kick about impeaching our fine president. This is a ridiculous waste of taxpayer money.
You know, that's a good point that we haven't brought up in this particular session is the millions of dollars that are being spent in all of these various prosecutions stemming from the Mueller investigation that, of course, have nothing to do with collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government to interfere in our elections.
That's right. That's right. This whole thing is a waste of people's time, money, efforts. It's not right. They're just on a witch hunt. I'm tired of it. It's wasting my time.
Well, Sally from Harrisburg, thanks for calling in. I appreciate having the benefit of the views. I think you're right on point. It is a gross waste of time and resources. The country has critical needs that need to be addressed by members of Congress and the executive branch, and we're wasting time and money on this purely political endeavor. Let's open up the phone lines. We'll take some other calls. Phil from Wiccanisco, what do you think? Did Michael Cohen violate the law? Is what Cohen and Trump allegedly have done, is it an impeachable offense?
They can make anything an impeachable offense, from what I've heard, from what I've seen. But this is ridiculous. I think the American people are fed up with it. At least anybody with some common sense is fed up with it. The economy's doing fantastic. A lot of the people that Mr. Trump has working under him, just about everybody having working under him, it's a mess. He doesn't even have a decent team put together there. And then you got, no, it's not an impeachable offense, if you look at it in that way. No, did Cohen break the law? I can't see how an attorney at his level would have broken the law. You know what I'm saying? He has the experience. How could you break the law if you're an attorney unless you're totally dim-witted? And I don't think Cohen's dim-witted. You know what I'm saying?
Well, he tape-recorded that conversation he had with his client, then candidate Trump. And if you listen to the tape, in no place in that tape does Mr. Cohen say, wait a second, then candidate Trump, what we're talking about here is a campaign finance violation.
So was it a campaign finance violation?
No.
Then there you go. There you go. They're looking for any way they can get this guy.
Right.
And they've reached a point. We've been through this kind of nonsense before, over and over and over again. We went in 1860. What did we do? We kept messing around with people until there was a civil war. In 1776, we put, we're ripe for either a civil or a revolutionary war. It's going to happen if they continue this nonsense. You put a person, you start harassing a person, and the person's got no other choice. He's going to make sure you're in the weeds near his home, and then he's going to clock you.
Well,
And in this case, the clocking would be a civil war, And we've done this before with very intelligent people. I wouldn't call Ben Franklin and those people dumb. They wouldn't have raged a revolutionary war unless they thought it was necessary.
Well, Phil, I appreciate your thoughts. Thanks for calling. Very good points you've raised. We'll take another call. We have Mark from Camp Hill. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show. Did Michael Cohen or Donald Trump violate the law?
Michael Cohen definitely violated the law. That plea that he pleaded in court stands as a breach in the law. Now, he's pleading, okay? He didn't go through a trial. Trump may have violated the law, okay? But if he didn't violate the campaign law, he violated the tax laws because he hid that from the Internal Revenue, the state of New York, and the local tax people. That hiding of that payment at that level where the wife will never see it, she never looks at the books, she's not involved with the company, tells you something. The other thing, too, this is different from all the other cases related to this because you have another party involved, the National Enquirer. They've already set a precedent of hiding stories to protect or exploit people. So what these people say is going to strengthen Cohen's and what he has to say about whether this was campaign related. Now, if he wanted to protect his wife, why didn't he protect her 6 months or 8 months or a year before when she was begging for money? When he saw that he was going to be president, okay, that's when it became more important and more paramount. One other thing, too, regarding you're saying, what does this have to do with collusion? That's a joke because the mandate that Mueller has is to find any criminality. You get a search warrant to go look for drugs in a house. You find a dead body. You don't ignore that. So by asking that question, which Trump routinely asks, his lawyers will say this because it's a red herring. There's nothing to it. Trump has been laundering money. He's been involved with all these other things. Okay, once you run for president of the United States, what he did not realize is that once you become president or before or during you become president, everything is going to come out.
Well, Mark from Camp Hill, I got to take a brief commercial break. Some very strong and poignant comments and remarks, and I want to thank you for calling in and letting us know what you think about this Michael Cohen plea deal and its effect on President Trump. Stay tuned. We're going to take a brief commercial break. You're listening to the Marc Scaringi Show.
Got a couple viewers on Facebook Live, so this commercial break's nearly over. Okay, so we've got one more minute on Facebook Live. There's just a couple viewers. If you do have anything to say or if you have any questions, feel free to type in your questions on the live broadcast there.
Thursday, when Sessions himself took the high road, saying he's been focused on the president's agenda from day one. Fox and Julian Turner. Hurricane Lane, now downgraded to a tropical storm, continues to dump massive amounts of on the Big Island alone. TMSS there, ready to help. We're pre-positioned very well, and we stand by to help the state of Hawaii respond and recover. Administrator Brock Long on Fox News. We report, you decide.
News Radio, WHP 580, powered by Frank Rossi, your local Geico agent. Call 232-3040. Let's get back to the Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We talk about the important political and legal issues of the day. And I don't think there's anything more critically important than the prosecution of Michael Cohen and its implication to then candidate Donald J. Trump in an alleged campaign violation. Democrats will use this as grounds for the impeachment of the president if they obtain control of the House of Representatives. I'm breaking down the statute that the Southern District accuses Michael Cohen of violating, and to which Michael Cohen pled guilty. And I'm reaching the conclusion that it is, in fact, not a campaign finance violation, what Mr. Cohen and or Donald J. Trump may have done. And I'm explaining that, giving the binding, controlling authority from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals that is binding on this Southern District Court. And we're talking about how the contribution needs to have been made for the primary purpose of influencing an election. And we have a very strong case on point that leads to the conclusion that it was not. So in the case involving Mr. Cohen, let's compare the two contributions of money, the contributions that Mr. Cohen made and the contributions in the New York Times case. In the one case, money was spent to purchase an ad in the New York Times that called for the impeachment of then-President Nixon, but also stated donations would be made to congressional candidates who support impeachment. They were even given coupons by which they can fill out and make donations and send it to the committee for the committee that paid the ad. Now, in the other case, our case, money was spent to ensure Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal did not disclose their alleged affairs with Mr. Trump. So in our case, we don't even make it to the level that a court should even consider whether money Cohen paid to Stormy or McDougal is a campaign violation. The Stormy and McDougal settlement agreements do not call for the election or the opposition of the election of any candidate for any office. It just has the settlement agreements have nothing to do with elections, and the money was used to pay off these two ladies for stories they had regarding allegations of sexual affairs from prior years. Again, nothing to do with an election for office, and so that's the main and significant distinction, and the reason why, in my view, what Mr. Cohen did and what Mr. Trump did is not a campaign violation. Now, let me give you another example, and I'm interested to hear what my callers, what my listeners think. Call in 717-540-0580, and we'll hear your question or your comment live on the air. You can also comment via Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live. So the other example is the Trump organization during the campaign spent millions of dollars promoting Donald Trump as a person, Donald Trump's businesses, Trump properties, so that people would rent a Trump apartment or stay in a Trump hotel. And that was the purpose of those expenditures. Now, they may have had an incidental purpose behind those expenditures. These expenditures may have incidentally influenced the presidential election by fostering a positive image of candidate Trump, but that was only incidental. The purpose of the Trump organization's advertisements was to sell apartments or to sell rooms or lease rooms in the Trump hotels. So that's a very important distinction. Are the millions and millions and millions of dollars that the Trump organization spent to promote its hotels and its rental properties, are those now all campaign donations to Donald Trump? They would have to be if you follow the logic of the United States District Court for the Southern District, if you follow the logic of the Department of Justice. The Clinton Foundation is a nonprofit corporation prohibited by law for making contributions to candidates for federal office. But the Clinton Foundation promoted Hillary Clinton heavily during the campaign and featured her at various events and paid her personal expenses and covered her expenses to attend these events. Should all of these payments made and these expenses incurred by the Clinton Foundation, should they be considered as campaign contributions to then Hillary Clinton and thus illegal because they're contributions or expenditures made by a corporation? Well, they certainly fostered a positive image of Hillary Clinton. They portrayed her in a beautiful, wonderful light as some great philanthropist of other people's money, by the way. But that you would have to reach that conclusion if you follow the Justice Department's theory in the Cohen case. So getting back to the court case that defines the term influencing an election. If the Second Circuit Court found an advertisement that discussed the impeachment of then President Nixon and how the committee who paid for the ad would give money to incumbents and candidates for Congress who voted for impeachment, that court found that was not done for the purpose of influencing an election. So how can paying money in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement about alleged sexual trysts that had nothing to do with an election, how could that possibly be considered a campaign contribution? It's not. Mr. Cohen has pled guilty to a crime that does not exist. And the Justice Department, remember, went down this road before when it prosecuted then presidential candidate John Edwards, and it ended up having egg all over its face. Remember the facts. Edwards had an affair during his campaign and impregnated his mistress. So he arranged for two of his already maxed out campaign donors to pay the living expenses of his then pregnant mistress to hide her, keep her away from the media during a critical point in his campaign. Now, it was an unprecedented prosecution for the Justice Department at the time, and still is today. There is no prior conviction for the offense that Michael Cohen pled guilty to based upon those facts. None. Now, Edwards claimed the purpose was to hide from his then cancer-ridden and dying wife the fact that his affair and the forthcoming child, that's what Edwards said his purpose was in coordinating and arranging for his maxed out donors to underwrite the living expenses of his mistress. Now, the prosecution argued the purpose was to influence his election. The jury deadlocked on 5 of the 6 felony counts and acquitted on the 6th count. And the Obama Justice Department chose not to retry the case. But now we have the Trump Justice Department, in light of that significant failure in previous years of trying to prosecute a federal candidate for something similar, we now have the Trump Justice Department prosecuting and obtaining a guilty plea out of Trump's former lawyer for something somewhat similar. I think that is a miscarriage of justice, to say the least. Now, and by the way, call in and let me know what you think. Did Michael Cohen plead to a crime, or do you agree with me that Michael Cohen pled to something that's not a crime? You can call in 717-540-0580 and talk to us live. You can also communicate with us via Harrisburg Facebook 100. And
right now, Mark, it looks like we do have a comment here on Harrisburg 100 on the live broadcast.
Oh, okay. Well, here we have a comment from a commenter. Is it clear that, and this is on Harrisburg 100's Facebook, is it clear that the defendant's campaign purpose must be explicitly stated? Still, though, it seems most informed people agree that it would be a difficult case to make against Trump, not to mention the presumption against criminal prosecution of a sitting president. Well, the statute, it doesn't give us much. It just talks about how the contribution or expenditure must be for the purpose of influencing an election. The case law is what tries to ferret that out, and it's the case law that says that the primary purpose must be to influence an election, and that there is no crime if influencing an election is simply an incidental purpose. And so that's the state of the law. It's very murky and it's vague, and that's why there have been no successful prosecutions using that statute and similar fact patterns, with the now exception of Michael Cohen. Okay, so let's and thank you for that comment on Facebook Live, and we'll get to some other comments and we'll take your questions. We're talking about Michael Cohen's guilty plea, its effect on President Donald J. Trump. We'll talk more about this after we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes here for the commercial break while we're still broadcasting on Facebook Live. And I want to thank Evan for commenting.
A very good question. This topic might be a little too specific, but it's a very important issue that's confronting the nation today. It's remarkable to me that Mr. Cohen pled to this offense, considering the binding precedent in that very jurisdiction, considering the prior failed attempt of the Justice Department to prosecute someone with a somewhat similar fact pattern. Michael Cohen is being represented by Lanny Davis, who is President Clinton and Hillary Clinton's main lawyer, advisor, consultant, promoter of all things Clinton.
Wow.
So, why on God's green earth would Michael Cohen hire Lanny Davis? Why would he ever accept this plea? Now, he probably accepted the plea because he did commit tax fraud and making false statements on banking applications, loan applications. All of these federal offenses carry significant penalties. We're talking about long terms of incarceration. So in order to get a substantially reduced sentence for the crimes Michael Cohen actually did commit, he had to accept what the prosecutor was demanding of him to plead to a campaign finance violation that doesn't exist, and then to add in his guilty plea colloquy when he's standing in front of the judge, to add that critical language that it was done to influence, for the purpose of influencing the election. They're obviously anticipating, the objections and the challenges to that prosecution.
Right. So, and I mean, and from the perspective also, I would say from myself and some of my audience, I would think that, we really appreciate your legal analysis of this matter, because just from the type of coverage we see, on the mainstream media, they want to describe it in such a way to implicate Trump further.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're taking the ball, they're running with it. Who has the time to really parse through the statute, prior court decisions? Alan Dershowitz, the renowned Harvard lawyer and professor, great civil libertarian, constitutional professor, agrees with me.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many other attorneys who are much better than I am, who agree with me as well. It's a shame that their voices are not being heard and communicated on the mainstream media.
Absolutely.
So we've got lots of calls on the phones, and we'll take those calls when we return from this brief commercial break.
Now back to the Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We advertise that we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day, and we certainly are being truth in advertising today. We're talking about Michael Cohen's guilty plea, its impact on President Trump. In a criminal sense, its impact on the Democrats' efforts to impeach this president. We'll open up the phone lines. We'll take some calls. Here we have Joe from Chambersburg. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show. What do you think? Did Michael Cohen commit a crime?
Well, I don't know. I really don't. But my comment was a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I asked the question, why don't Trump learn from the Clintons? You remember the trail of dead people that were political liabilities? I mean, how many people showed up dead? And here, the Trump, they seem to, they don't do that. They have a different game plan, I guess.
Well, Joe from Harrisburg, yes, thanks for the call and the comment, and it's certainly very different treatment that this president is getting from his own Justice Department, nonetheless, and Hillary Clinton was successful in escaping all kinds of prosecutions for various crimes that she committed during her long tenure in elective office, in appointed office. Well,
I still think that the Clintons had insiders in the FBI that allowed them to get away with it.
Yeah. Well, Joe from Chambersburg, thank you.
That's my comments.
Okay, thank you. And let's open up the phone lines. We'll take some other calls. We have Bill from Philadelphia. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show. Did Michael Cohen and Donald Trump commit a campaign finance violation?
I believe that Cohen committed, but not like what they're accusing him of. He just took the plea bargain just to get out of a whole mess of trouble down the line. I don't believe they have any merit.
Okay, so you don't believe that we took a call from Bill from Philadelphia, and you don't believe these the charges against Michael Cohen have any merit. Is that right, Bill from Philadelphia?
What I'm saying is he just plea bargained to get himself out of 30 years instead of 3 to 5. I believe what he did was totally wrong. But my point, like why I called was, if these Democrats would just take half the energy they got towards impeaching our president, and the money that's being spent, they could reform, the immigration, just half of the energy. Like, they're so bent against, taking our president down. But I believe why it doesn't happen is because they don't want to see our president, get the credit for anything good that's going to come out of it. You know what I mean?
I do. Bill from Philadelphia, thank you. And Bill is pointing out the way many of our callers are pointing out that it looks like President Trump is receiving an awful lot of attention from the law enforcement and the Justice Department that other candidates, other elected officials, Hillary Clinton among others, would not have received. The president is very frustrated. He constantly now, he's been for over a year and a half, railing against his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. He's saying, what is going on in this Justice Department? I mean, who has control over the Justice Department? Jeff Sessions recused himself without any basis in doing so very early on in the president's administration. Remember, the rules about recusal have to do with criminal investigations and whether or not the prosecutor or the attorney general in charge has any sort of conflict of interest in a criminal investigation being undertaken by his inferior officers in the Department of Justice. But what Jeff Sessions was actually looking at the time was not a criminal prosecution. It was a national intelligence investigation. It was not a criminal prosecution. Jeff Sessions didn't understand the law and the rules of recusal. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why President Trump is so upset with his attorney general. It started as a national intelligence, a national security investigation to determine whether the Russian government or Russian actors had intervened in the U.S. presidential elections. The purpose was to determine what steps need to be taken by our national security apparatus to counter and prevent that from happening again. That was the initial purpose of the investigation. It was not a criminal investigation. Nevertheless, Jeff Sessions, without basis in the law, recused himself. And now we have Rod Rosenstein issuing an order of appointment of the special counsel that was very broad. And there should not have been a special counsel appointed. There was no probable cause that a crime occurred. And there still isn't. We've had how many prosecutions and guilty pleas and convictions of Trump officials or Trump allies? None of them have anything to do with criminal collusion, with collusion to violate the criminal statutes of our country between any member of the Trump campaign or allies and the Russian government. It just doesn't exist. So there never was probable cause for the appointment of a special counsel. There never was a legal basis for Jeff Sessions to recuse himself. President Trump is angry by that, and there's very little he can do politically. He's boxed in. If Trump fires Sessions, if Trump fires Rosenstein, which he has every right to do, there will be impeachment. Impeachment will be drawn up immediately in the House of Representatives. So that's an unfortunate consequence when we don't follow the rule of law. We'll take a quick question. Jeff from Lancaster, you're on the Marc Scaringi Show. I've got about 1 minute for a quick question. What do you think about Michael Cohen's plea deal?
I think that everybody's forgetting that it may be due to the fruit of the poisonous tree, that the entire search was illegal, the entire seizure was illegal, and therefore the entire conviction and plea bargain is illegal.
Well, let me speak to that particular issue. Remember,
and if the search was due to the furtherance of hindering a prosecution of a crime, then the whole thing was illegal. And if you should see page 28 of the document in case 18-1816, that U.S. Court of Appeals.
Okay, Jeff from Lancaster, we'll take a look at that court case. Now, in this particular matter, there was probable cause to believe that Michael Cohen evaded our tax laws and engaged in making false statements to financial institutions. So there was probable cause to initiate that investigation, and Michael Cohen has now pled to those offenses. So I'm not sure there is any fruit of the poisonous tree argument in that particular case, but it was clearly done for an incidental motive, and that is to see if Michael Cohen has done anything that can be used to implicate the president. In the same manner in which Paul Manafort has been prosecuted and now found guilty of 8 criminal offenses. The Justice Department in prior years already took a pass, already decided, for whatever reason, and this was the Obama Justice Department, that they were not going to prosecute Paul Manafort for any of those offenses that they were aware of at the time. Now we have a special counsel under Mueller. Now Paul Manafort gets investigated, and prosecuted for those offenses. Again, none of them have anything to do with collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government to influence the election. But obviously that was the purpose of Bob Mueller's investigation and prosecution of Paul Manafort. It was the purpose to try to find something that can be used against President Trump. Happily, Mueller found nothing. Happily, the American people can rest assured that their president did not collude or conspire with the Russian government or Russian state actors to intervene and disrupt the U.S. presidential election. We've had over 2 years of investigation by the FBI, the DOJ, every national security agency that exists, and they've all come up empty. So that's the good news that comes out of the Manafort conviction and the Michael Cohen guilty plea. Still, no evidence of any kind of collusion. That's all the time we have this week. I want to thank you for listening to the Marc Scaringi Show. Tune in same time next week on WHP 580, iHeartRadio, and Harrisburg Facebook Live. Harrisburg 100. Well, thank you to all of those at Harrisburg Facebook Live. Appreciate you listening today. Hopefully you're able to hear some of what was said. And I guess we had some technical difficulties, and we'll continue to work on those and see if we can't figure those out for next week. But thanks for listening, Harrisburg 100.
Great show, Mark. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sean, and thanks again to Sean Guay for giving us the ability to communicate to all of the Harrisburg 100 Facebook participants.